Welcome, everyone. My name is Christina Guros. I am a Citizenship Program and Policy Specialist with the Seattle Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, or OIRA. I go by she, her pronouns. As I mentioned at the beginning, to those who are present, we're going to do some intros in the chat today, just for everyone to kind of say hello and where you're coming from, what organizations you work with, as opposed to doing a go round of intros as we would normally like to do in a meeting. But today is just kind of an information session about the new citizen campaign letter of intent application process. And so we're keeping it a little more formal. This session is being recorded and we will put it up on our website. As well as a record of the questions that were asked both in the chat and aloud today so that we can offer that information of the answers to anyone who visits our website and is interested in applying. So with that, Rachel Green and I, also from OIRA, will be keeping an eye on the chat as we go. But I'm just going to start us off with some slides with some background information on our office and this funding opportunity. Okay, so let's make sure. Okay, so the Seattle Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs mission is to improve the lives of Seattle's immigrant and refugee communities by engaging them in decisions about the city of Seattle's future and improving the city's programs and services to meet the needs of all constituents. The office was founded in 2012, so we're at our 10-year anniversary now, by ordinance and by community organizers who wanted to make sure that immigrants and refugees were present in the city's decision-making processes and to make sure that Seattle services were relevant and accessible by all constituents. So I'm breezing through this a little quickly just to get to the meat of the content. But OIRA's programming includes funding for legal services, which is inclusive of this program, the New Citizen Campaign, as well as programs like the Legal Defense Fund and Network, as well as some one-time programs such as supports for DACA applicants and recipients, disaster relief fund, similar to programs being run by the state and county currently. We also have things that include our ethnic media program, our IFI, or Immigrant Family Institute, and Ready to Work. Those are some programs that some of you may be familiar with or may be contracted to support. And we also provide citywide leadership and kind of breaking through silos at the city to make sure that services through all city departments are accessible and equitable. So we are a welcoming city, the city of Seattle, which means we do not discriminate based on immigration status, nor do we typically ask immigration status for accessing city programs. Language access is one of our most pressing and important priorities in terms of the services offered throughout the city and making sure that information provided by city departments and gathered through city departments is accessible to folks who speak English as languages other than English and may not be able to access English as in terms of the city processes and how they're normally published. So this is going to be the bulk of the presentation, is talking about this funding opportunity in and of itself. The New Citizen Campaign, or NCC, is offering a letter of intent process with an approximated amount of money of $240,000 available. The reason why this is an estimate is because the city is going through its budget process right now, and we won't find out the final amount of funding available for this program until that process ends in mid-November. The idea is for this funding to be available to nonprofits with experience in naturalization services or citizenship navigation, which we'll go into in just a moment. And the idea is that we would offer this as a 2-year contract instead of the typical city contracts or the typical OIRA contracts, which are 1 year in duration. Again, for that to be the case, that's dependent on City Council appropriations and also dependent on contractor performance. The New Citizen Campaign. So some of you present on the call are partners currently with the New Citizen Campaign, but the program seeks to increase the numbers of immigrants and refugees who naturalize and engage in the civic process locally. So NCC started out as a big campaign with lots of media and broad-based outreach. That's still a focus of ours. And now our services include naturalization clinics and workshops. We also have a big emphasis on promoting the benefits of citizenship and making sure that the community and potential applicants are aware of the steps needed for the naturalization process and how to apply. We also work very closely with our partners, both the NCC partners working closely with one another and also with our office. And we work with national partners such as cities and counties for citizenship. So the NCC table is a collaborative network of agencies that work together to put on these citizenship clinics and also to offer supports for those applicants who would choose to apply for citizenship. Currently, NCC works with 13 nonprofit partners, as well as other nonprofits who might choose to engage in clinics one time or might assist with outreach. Our clinic model, as we'll go into in just a bit, is a little bit different than it's been in the past during this time of kind of COVID-19 pandemic and pandemic recovery. So in the past, we would have done one clinic a month, but our model has kind of shifted and changed over the last 2.5 years. And so now we're offering a variety of clinic models, which include very small clinics. And so we've, for this year, we're at about 20 clinics being offered per year because they're smaller than they used to be. But typically in any given year, we'd be serving 250 to 400 participants at our clinics. I'm going to keep going, and if people do have questions, please feel free to add them in the chat. But one of the questions, excuse me, I'm going to go back. One of the questions that's come up so far is NCC versus NCP. So the Seattle Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs has 2 citizenship programs, both with very similar names, so it is a little bit confusing. NCC, which is this current funding opportunity surrounds the New Citizen Campaign, NCC, is a bit different from another program in our office, New Citizen Program. New Citizen Program is the longer running program within OIRA. NCP has been a part of the city infrastructure for the last 25 years. NCC is newer. We started in 2016. And this slide kind of lays out the difference between the 2 programs. NCC, this current opportunity, focuses on one-time services. So citizenship clinics, kind of assisting people who may need some help filling out their application for citizenship, but may not need full-time or ongoing representation, which is more so the NCP model. NCC is therefore not necessarily assisting people who have complex cases, whereas NCP is helping folks who might have disability waivers or other vulnerabilities that make their cases a little bit more difficult. NCC tends to help people who just need a little nudge or want to have an attorney or legal representative go over their case with them, but may not need ongoing representation. We also endeavor to serve people who may not qualify for NCP or other free legal services programs. That might mean that they're slightly over income or do not receive DSHS benefits, or there could be other reasons that would make it difficult for them to be eligible for free programming, but would otherwise not be able to afford legal representation from a private attorney. So we're looking at that low to middle income group, which in Seattle is pretty big because a lot of people who are earning what we think of as maybe middle income may not be able to afford services because the cost of living around here is so very high, and the cost of legal services are also very high. And then just the final point is that NCC is funded solely through the general fund, the City of Seattle taxpayer dollars, whereas NCP is funded through a hybrid model of funding. So this is just kind of an overview. Just want to make it clear. There are two different programs. We endeavor to complement one another and to refer back and forth, but NCC is the opportunity available right now. It's a low touch model. We really focus on collaboration with all of our partner agencies, and we're focusing on people who cannot access other free legal services. So because NCC is built around application assistance events or clinics, this is just a brief opportunity to discuss what a clinic is. For all of the details in this presentation, I would just encourage you to refer back to the letter of intent guidelines that kind of go into further detail about every one of these topics. So an NCC clinic is a little bit different than ongoing legal representation in that we try to use volunteers and collaborative support to assist more than one person at the same time to kind of expand access to services or expand capacity. So what that looks like is that generally NCC clinics would be led by 2 or more agencies working together with additional agencies supporting the clinic or event, as well as volunteer attorneys, volunteer interpreters, and volunteer runners and general volunteers who would support the event. So this is a visual that shows us that in order to make that work, typically clinics will go through a multi-step process to ensure that volunteer time is being used to the best possible extent. So a participant who comes to an NCC clinic, whether it's in person or virtual, will first register. And then typically at an in-person event, that the applicant would be screened by an attorney or what's called a Department of Justice accredited representative, screened for eligibility and making sure there aren't any red flags in their case that might get them in trouble if they apply for citizenship. Then they would move on to get their 20-page N-400 application filled out. Typically that would be done by somebody who's not an attorney or a legal specialist, but by somebody who may be a paralegal or has some background in and training to help fill out the form. The next step would be that form is then reviewed by, again, an attorney or a legal expert who's able to check that the form was filled out correctly. Again, looking for red flags or anything that might get the applicant in trouble if they submit it to immigration or USCIS. And then finally, the applicant would go to a space where they can get their application copied so that they have a copy for themselves, and then get all of the envelope and information about how to submit their application, which they would then most often do on their own after the event. So as you can see, one of these stations is kind of highlighted in this model, which is I'm calling participant preparation, because during the pandemic, what we saw when we switched from large in-person events to remote services was that this piece of making sure that applicants have all the information that they need in order to get started became a more important or maybe more onerous part of the process. So this participant preparation is also something we'll talk about in just a moment as we look at what are the opportunities for roles for NCC through this funding cycle. Okay, so this is just to highlight that the visual on the left shows a large gym where a number of applicants are being assisted at once in a pre-pandemic clinic, pre-pandemic NCC clinic, whereas the image on the right shows an individual being assisted in kind of a larger classroom space to allow for social distancing, people wearing masks, etc. So during this time of kind of limbo with the pandemic, NCC clinics are able to be held in person in a group setting. They're able to be hybrid, partially in person and partially remote, or you can also choose to lead a clinic that is fully remote if that's something that you think your target audience would be able and willing to access. So I really encourage you to look through the guidelines to kind of see examples of what those models could look like. And I also encourage you to explore what models would be best for the populations that you serve. Okay, so with that, you know, we've talked so far a little bit about the clinics, and again, that is kind of what NCC has typically focused on. But within the LOI that we have here, you'll see that there are a number of ways to support the clinics or support the larger ecosystem of citizenship assistance, and the NCC table more generally. And so we're going to talk about these different roles for just a moment to kind of make sure that it's clear that there are different types of support that NCC includes. And so there are different ways that agencies with different types of expertise might be able to participate. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide because we'll talk about each one individually, but I do want to say that it is okay to apply for more than one of these roles. Some current partners do more than one body of work within NCC, and we're going to continue to allow that, or you know, that's a possibility for each applicant agency to explore. But I do want to encourage everyone to apply for the role or roles that best suit your capacity and interest, and how you think you can best serve the participants that you'd be targeting. So again, as I go through, if there are questions, feel free to add them to the chat. And if anyone also wants to raise their hand and interrupt, that's fine too. But we will also have a portion for Q&A toward the end. So the first role is related to the clinics that I was just discussing. So clinic leadership and implementation. This is an opportunity for agencies that want to put on an event where individuals can come and get their 20-page citizenship application filled out. So this would include all the prep work to plan the event, decide who you're targeting, decide where you want to have it, whether it's a physical location or online, and then to, you know, include outreach, to include volunteer recruitment and training. There are many, many details that go into a clinic, which many of which can be found in the guidelines document. And what I would want to mention, there are some pieces that I want to call out from that guidelines document. One of them is that most clinics tend to be co-led. NCC really is a collaborative program, and so that's something that's definitely emphasized here. Typically, in past contracts, we would have payment points surrounding whether or not you work together to put the event on. And we do have, you know, we do want to make sure that we're serving a minimum number of people, but this isn't an instance where you are competing for individual clients or competing for a number of clients for each clinic. We really do emphasize paying for the work that's being done. And we do recognize that working collaboratively oftentimes does mean a lot more work than doing a project on your own. And so just want to emphasize that there is the opportunity, if you make the case for leading a clinic by yourself, that is something that we'll consider. But again, one of our values is collaboration. And so that is, it's something that the review panel will be looking at. If you do decide to lead clinics on your own, just having a justification for why you'd like to do that. And another question that has come up so far is who can lead a clinic? One of what I think of as a great thing about NCC is that you can co-lead a clinic even if you do not have legal staff on board at your agency. but you do need to partner with an agency that does have either a DOJ accredited rep or an attorney on staff. That doesn't mean that you have to have in mind right now who that partner agency with legal staff would be, but it does mean that you need to be flexible in being paired with an agency that does have legal capacity. And I'll just go into briefly the reason for this. Applying for citizenship involves a number of legal determinations, providing legal advice for the applicants who are present, making sure that the processes that you have in place at the clinic are adequate to catch red flags and make sure that the people applying for citizenship aren't putting themselves at risk and are eligible to apply without putting themselves at risk, essentially. And so having legal staff be present in that planning process, of course, be present in the legal clinic itself is just very important. And so you may choose to co-lead a clinic if you do not have legal staff on board, but you do need to pair up with an agency that does have legal staff who can handle that planning process. And then the other thing I'll say about it is that the NCC clinics, because of the general fund funding source from city council and city taxpayer dollars, the clinics themselves must take place in Seattle. So that's something that we typically get a lot of questions about every year. Can we have a clinic in SeaTac, in Kent, Tukwila, et cetera? I would love that, but as of right now, that's not an option. So your proposals to have a clinic in another city, it's not like they will be rejected, but it will be considered whether or not you'd be able to host a clinic in Seattle proper with support from our office and other partners. Okay, so moving on to role 2. This is a role that has been part of NCC, but maybe not very explicit. So the citizenship navigation and participant preparation role is to really build up the pipeline of people attending NCC clinics and the pipeline of people applying for citizenship. So what an agency choosing to fill this role would be do outreach to the communities they serve, or new or different communities that they're proposing to serve, in order to make sure that they have information about the benefits of citizenship and what the citizenship application process entails. They would be helping individual and possibly groups of participants to gather the many documents and many pieces of information that are needed to fill out the citizenship application. They would then, with that information gathered, refer participants to upcoming NCC clinics, upcoming clinics or events that are put on by other groups, or to one-on-one services if that's kind of the determination that might be what the participant might need. So this type of role would be with support of the NCC table and OIRA in terms of training and kind of being aware of the different requirements for clinics versus other one-on-one services. But this is the type of work that somebody who chooses role number 2 would do. For both the clinic role and for this navigation role, there is an emphasis on following up with past participants to see how they're doing through the process. Because NCC applicants are mostly sending their N400 application to USCIS on their own, that means that there's a need to follow up with them to see how the process is going and whether they need anything as they prepare for their interview. So this is different than case management, where you would have what's known as a G28 on file, so you'd be able to see the updates from a case. In the case of NCC, we're following up with participants by text, by email, by phone, by whatever means necessary to kind of figure out what's happening with their case and whether they need any ongoing support. For the role number 2, I think we'll talk about this in a moment, but you do not necessarily need to be an expert in the citizenship process, but you do need to have some awareness of whether the clients that you're hoping to serve are interested in citizenship, or maybe, and the difference between that and then maybe being in need of other types of immigration processes, which unfortunately NCC is not funding at this time. Okay, so role 3 is probably the most open-ended of the possible roles for NCC. So technical assistance and legal expertise is something that an agency can choose to provide to support the clinics and the NCC table and network of providers. Some of the options that have been provided in the past include providing legal expertise at the clinics. As I mentioned, clinics are run by volunteer attorneys and legal experts who do eligibility screening and check completed applications for accuracy. So that's an option that you could choose to support a clinic if you have legal staff on board who would be willing to attend a clinic or multiple clinics to provide that support. There's also the option of training on either legal topics or program management topics, or topics on how to run a clinic or other tips or tricks that your agency may know or have picked up on. Ongoing legal expertise to partners. This is something we've tried in the past and are continuing to experiment with, is if there is an agency with legal expertise, so it willing to be available to answer questions, or maybe questions on how to refer an applicant with a specific issue. That's an opportunity. And then really, if you all think of other ways that could support providers of citizenship or naturalization services, then you're open to be able to propose those. So these are just some more reminders about the roles, or some tidbits about the roles. Making sure that you're applying for a role that suits your agency capacity and expertise. So if you do not have legal expertise on staff, you would not be applying for a technical assistance role that would have you, checking over completed applications at the clinics. It doesn't mean that you can't apply to train other partners on program management topics or do a technical assistance role more generally, but just saying, make sure that whatever you're applying for suits your capacity and abilities, or potential abilities. We will do our best to evaluate each portion of your application separately, while still trying to cover all 3 roles for the broader NCC table. So I just calling that out, but gonna move on for now. So this is just to show that, it is possible to apply for more than one role. And that's up to you whether you want to do that. So these are just kind of examples of what that could look like. You could apply just for one role, and you could apply for more than one. I guess somebody could apply for all 3 roles, but that would be kind of a very diverse set of expertise within one agency. And just to emphasize that there isn't like bonus points for you applying for more than one role. We are going to do our best to evaluate things separately. And when I see we, I actually mean the review panel, not myself. Eligibility for NCC, just want to make sure that everyone applying would be a 501c3 or have that status, or have a fiscal sponsor. If you do have a fiscal sponsor, the fiscal sponsor and the agency applying would both need to sign the contract with OIRA. So just making sure that your fiscal sponsor is ready and available to do that. We are looking for agencies that have prior experience providing naturalization or citizenship navigation services in Seattle. We can be fairly open-ended about what that experience looks like, but you do need to have a realistic plan for how you would be providing services. And then we are really looking for agencies that are interested in collaborative work and trying new approaches to assisting folks to apply for US citizenship. So just want to emphasize that you do not have to be a DOJ recognized agency in order to apply for NCC. Within the guidelines, there's a link to Department of Justice recognition and accreditation details that you can look into. If you do not have that recognition status for your agency, that's okay. We do need to kind of balance our partners to make sure that at least some of the agencies we work with have legal expertise on staff, or else we can't really run the clinics, but it is not a requirement for each agency to have that status. Again, the clinics must take place within the city of Seattle. And then, yeah, again, if you do not have experience in naturalization per se, you at least need to show that the groups or the groups of applicants that you're hoping to serve have eligibility for naturalization or interest in naturalization, and not perhaps need for other types of immigration services that may not be covered under NCC. Like I said at the beginning of the call, we are hoping to make these 2-year contracts to provide that support for our partner agencies, and so that you are kind of set up for 2 years of funding. That will be subject, of course, to any changes that City Council might have in terms of funding amounts. In general, NCC contracts, this LOA process would potentially prepare an agency to work with OIRA for the next several years until the next LOI process. We tend to run those processes every 3 to 5 years or so, but applying for this contract would potentially set an agency up to work with us for the next several years, and as long as performance is up to par. Again, we emphasize working collaboratively, and that's the type of work that we're doing with NCC. There is some information within the guidelines and application cover sheet about the fact that we do ask all agencies to participate in a monthly NCC call, as well as planning calls and meetings for each clinic and debrief conversations after each clinic. So having capacity to be present as part of a collaborative is very important. Also want to emphasize that these contracts tend to be fairly small. These are not contracts that would necessarily sustain a staff person, as much as I would like them to be. But these are typically fairly small contracts. $15,000 to $20,000 is pretty typical, but that does not mean you can't apply for less funding or more funding as you wish through this LOI. There isn't a $20,000 limit on your application, nor on the contracts themselves. As I mentioned before, the process of pairing agencies with one another to work on clinics is fairly fluid up until we get to the start of the contract year. And so having flexibility around that is very important. In general, these clinics and events take a lot of flexibility day in and day out as you're planning and on the day of the event. And so that's just something we really emphasize to make sure that agencies kind of meet that criteria. Okay, so this timeline is within the application materials. I think the most important upcoming deadlines are Friday, September 30th will be the last day to submit questions to the OIRA RFP at seattle.gov email address. We do prefer emailed questions so that we can be very even and equal in the way that we're responding to questions and make sure that everyone has the same information. And then the applications are due on Friday, October 28th at 5 p.m. We do really want, if you can send it in the day before, just so we can make sure that all the materials were attached properly and all of that. But the final deadline is at the end of October at 5 p.m. The rest of this timeline kind of goes into when and how we'll go into decision making and how we'll do contract negotiations. Applicants will be notified on December 1st. Partly this is to give the panel a realistic amount of time to be able to meet, to confer about the applications, but also to ensure that we have the final dollar amounts from the City Council budget in terms of what the contracts would look like. This goes into kind of when we do contract negotiations, but essentially the work of the contract will begin in January of 2023, and we'd be doing getting going on some of our planning work in January. So these are kind of emphasize the reminders about the timeline. And the next slide is also just a reminder about how to answer or submit your questions. I'm going to pause for just a moment. If people do have questions that you want to raise now, this is the end of our slideshow, but we will look at the application cover sheet in just a moment. And go ahead, Rita.
Hi. Yes, I just had a clarifying question.
Yeah.
For the LOI, do you want organizations to submit an LOI together, or if we just wanted to do like technical assistance and be open to any organization that wants to use us for technical assistance, do it that way, or does it not matter?
You know, I apologize. I think we did not actually clarify that. I'll have to double check in the materials to see if that is really clearly spelled out. In general, we would ask for each agency to submit an application. If you have an idea of who specifically you want to work with, then to spell that out. If assuming that each agency is hoping to be awarded funding through this work. We have had agencies in the past that have worked, for instance, planned to partner with a private law firm that wasn't receiving any funding, but just wanted to give capacity to a clinic. It would not be necessary or even possible for that type of partner to submit an application, but assuming that both partners want to receive funding through this LOI, then each would submit separate applications. If you have ideas for who you want to work with, it is great to spell that out in the LOI, but it is not necessary. If you more generally want to work to support the network broadly, or if you have a specific type of agency that you'd like to support, for instance, an agency without legal capacity that is doing the work of navigation and referral, then you could spell that out specifically, but you don't necessarily need to spell out the names of specific agencies. So, you know, it's great and awesome if you do coordinate with one another and kind of get the lay of the land and, you know, see who's who and who might be applying, but it's not necessary. And we would ask for kind of ongoing flexibility from any of our agencies that we're contracting with to kind of work through some of those kinks as we get into early next year. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a really good point, though. I don't think that we explicitly named that we would like each agency hoping to receive funding to apply, which is a bit different. You know, and I might follow up with a bit more detail. I think in general, we haven't had with NCC subcontractors. It's something that I'm not going to say at this moment that is barred or like we wouldn't do, but I do want to, I would say look for information in the FAQ for kind of specific details on that, because I don't have a great answer for whether or not we would allow that type of arrangement. Any other questions for now?
You can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Our organization, as you know, is nonprofit and has a radio station in this in our structure. To support this campaign, we could include it's a part of this community outreach campaign.
So, are you referring to radio station?
Yes.
And would it? I'm just reaching a bit like, would it be that you're proposing to offer information to the community and that be your contribution, offer information through the radio program?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that is something you can definitely propose. And let me say that, sorry, I'm just thinking.
I know.
I think that's something you can propose. And I'm trying to think if it would fit better within the navigation services or technical assistance type of a. I think that in general, the technical assistance is a bit more open-ended, that we're kind of asking you to propose what it is you want. Whereas the citizenship navigation work is a bit more prescriptive. But I think in general, NCC is about innovation and trying new things. So I think we, you know, again, I might offer more information in the FAQs, but I think it's fine to propose that as your body of work and Maybe I might be able to provide some more information in the FAQs as to where that body of work might fit in best, but you can also use your creativity in thinking through that.
Okay, okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Olivia?
Yeah, hi. Just because I work for a large organization that offers lots of different types of services, I want to clarify to my team, can an individual organization submit multiple applications for different types of services, or would those all need to fall under one application?
Interesting. You know, I was just going to go over that in looking at the application cover sheet, that I would leave it to you whether you would combine the answers to different questions. I think for the sake of the review panel, my gut is to say it would be nice to have those applications combined, but if the structure of your agency is very separate, then maybe it would be okay to follow that structure. I'm leaning toward the former, that having one application per agency would kind of help organize the review panel's review. Yeah, and I also am kind of going to reach out for call a friend, Rachel. I don't know if any of the last 3 questions, if you have anything to add or kind of supplement, or things you know about this, how our office does contracting that might help. And no pressure, Rachel.
Oh no, I think they're really great questions.
Yeah.
And they're making me scratch my head a little in a good
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So I think, as Christina said, we will, if we have kind of clearer guidance, we will absolutely have that in the FAQ on our the RFP information site.
And Olivia, I'm not sure if you might have put it in the chat. Okay, yes, I do see. Perfect. Yeah, we'll also, you know, try once we have the FAQ document published to shoot another email out to the participants here, and also the group of folks that we sent the initial announcement out to, just to be so you're aware that those answers have been posted. But yeah, more to come.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop share for just a second, and then feel free to keep asking questions as I kind of switch over. I'm going to share my screen for the cover sheet, but Rita, did you still have a question, or is this from before?
Yes, I do have another
Oh, yeah,
question.
go for it. Yep.
If you guys were thinking of this as a network, where different organizations might play different roles within all of this, will there be quarterly meetings or monthly meetings to go over how the program is going in general with all the different organizations that are participating?
Yes. And we will, so in what this has looked like in the past, you know, we've had 2-hour once a month meetings. We've had, during the beginning of pandemic, we had bi-weekly meetings to just check in and see how people were doing with their transition to remote work. And then as of late, we've had once a month meetings that are about an hour in length, but then we open it up to a second hour to discuss any policy or case questions that are coming up. And so many of our partners will stay on just for the first hour, and many will stay on for the second hour to kind of discuss those things. So we will have some discretion to both check in with you all and see what's working and what, you know, all the partners are preferring in terms of the collaborative work and that opportunity for all partners to meet. But typically it's more along the lines of a monthly meeting than a quarterly meeting. We have in the past, you know, like I said, we've tried different models, and we'll continue to kind of have that open dialogue about what works, but it is, the emphasis is on that connection and making sure that we're checking in with one another. And so I would venture to guess that it would be about a monthly meeting cadence. Did that answer? Yeah, okay. Outside of that, if you are working on a clinic with a partner, then you'll determine, you know, what that meeting structure looks like. I think especially for newer partners or newer pairings, that tends to look like at least every other week meeting for, 2 or 3 months before a clinic, if not weekly, depending on the partnership and what the planning process looks like. So there are, it is very project-based work depending on the role that you choose. And that can mean a fair number of meetings surrounding the clinic time itself. But for partners more generally, I would say about once a month is standard.
And Christina, is it still the case that that is a requirement of the contract to be attending
Yes.
those meetings? Okay.
Yes, yeah. And my only hesitation about the cadence is that until we get that contract in place, we will kind of determine what that cadence looks like. And there are times, some years where maybe in August we choose not to meet because a lot of folks will be out, and so that wouldn't be a docking of, it wouldn't be any issue with the contract, but most likely for the contract that gets signed in January, we most likely will have a monthly meeting cadence. Okay, I'm going to share my screen just to go over the cover sheet. Give me just a second. But please feel free to ask any remaining questions as I'm doing that. I just, let's see, are you all able to, no. Oops. All right. Okay, are you seeing that? I feel like it's giving the wrong screen.
I'm seeing the letter of intent 2023.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. So the letter of intent, the proposal checklist, is that what you have up? No.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing.
Okay, great. For some reason, my screen shows it a little differently. So I just wanted to go over this briefly while I have you all on the line. Again, if questions are coming up as I'm talking, let's prioritize those. But as long as we're waiting on questions, let's go ahead and go over this. So the proposal checklist, it's fairly straightforward. In addition to the information that would be contained in this cover sheet document, we would additionally ask for proof of the agency's 501c3 status. So again, that could be your status, or if you're fiscally sponsored, that would be the 501c3 status of your fiscal sponsor. If you are fiscally sponsored, you would additionally need a letter that confirms the kind of relationship that the two agencies have. So aside from that proof of 501c3 status, everything else is kind of contained in this document that is required for this application. For that reason, we're calling it a letter of intent process because it's maybe fairly straightforward compared to some of the longer RFP or RFQ type application processes that public entities might put out. But otherwise, that's just kind of a LOI versus RFP. It's pretty similar. So the submission instructions here are the same instructions that are contained on the guidelines. So I'm just going to go through this to show what it is that we're looking for. We do need all the information on the cover sheet here filled in. We would ask that you name a project lead or somebody to that we can contact about the this project. But if that is in flux, I do think it's important to name somebody here, but it could be that by the time the contract starts, you have a different representative, and that's okay too. Again, wanting to make sure that we have information about your organization status or your fiscal sponsor status. I'm going to highlight here the budget. And I apologize, I'm not sure. I didn't ask if you all are able to see. The budget here, just wanted to emphasize that we're not asking you for a full on agency budget, but what we are asking, in terms of a complete printout of your agency budget, but we are asking you all for your overall budget for your agency, This could be for 2021, given where we are, or depending on your fiscal year, it'd be the most recent fiscal year. And then what percentage or amount of your overall budget goes toward your naturalization program. Now, it could be that your naturalization program is kind of, right now, it's more like a legal services program, or there's some other bucket that your naturalization services will fit into. So use your discretion there in terms of what you list as your naturalization budget. This next section here, we definitely need to fill out which role you're interested in or roles you're interested in for this project. So making sure you click one or more of these boxes is very helpful to the review panel to be able to see what they're looking for in terms of your responses to the narrative questions. This naturalization staff section also asking you to use a bit of discretion here. So when we're asking for paid legal staff, we're mostly referring to attorneys or Department of Justice accredited representatives. If you have folks like legal interns on board, but no attorneys, it's fine to answer as you wish, but then kind of provide us more details below as to what are the qualifications of your legal staff. We also ask if you have like interns for part of the year, try and specify like what that looks like. We're just trying to get a sense of your capacity for legal services. If you're an agency that's applying for navigation services and you do not have legal staff on board at this time, that's okay too. But please just kind of provide then information about the folks who would be working on this naturalization services program. Even if they're not considered legal staff, that's okay. So then going through I'm not going to go through one by one the narrative questions, but I just wanted to point out that for this first section, all applicants do need to fill out this portion. And I think this might lead back to the earlier question about how this, well, we'll definitely let you know on the FAQs, but in general, we want all applicants to fill out this section here, questions 1 through 5 for all applicants. And then from there, agencies would choose which of the role specific questions to fill out. So if you're applying just for one role, that means you're going to answer a minimum of 10 questions. So 5 general questions plus the 5 questions from your section. Each of the role sections has 5 questions. So if you were planning to apply for all 3 roles, you would, that would be an additional 15 questions for a total of 20. But again, we'll get back to you as to whether or not different parts of an agency might be applying separately for this LOA. The other thing I wanted to point out before I kind of get out of this very wordy document is that there are kind of headers here per question that reflect directly back to the criteria that we're using to review the application. So this is just, to make it easier on applicants and also the review panel to kind of see what is it that we're looking for and how we're reviewing it. So as you're looking at these headers within the guidelines, there is an evaluation criteria section that kind of gives for each header, each area, what are the things that we're looking for. So I just wanted to point that out because we're, trying to be very transparent about the process and what it looks like. And that's, that's reflected in these guidelines. So I'm going to stop share again. We have a couple minutes left. I'm sorry I talked longer than I thought on this section. Any questions that arose either from looking at the cover sheet and narrative questions or things that have, that you're thinking of now that might want to ask before we close out. And it's fine to stay on a couple minutes if there are more than one question, so don't be shy. Go ahead, Rita.
Yes. You may have mentioned this, but about how many clinics in a year were you guys anticipating so that we can sort of try to come up with a budget?
Yeah. In general, this year we're running our calendar a little bit short. So I believe we have 8 or 9 clinics for this year that's running approximately January through October. Typically, we'd want about a clinic a month. But again, because of pandemic, we've had kind of a different mix of models. So what we've done recently is had about 1 clinic a month plus about 1 quote unquote mini clinic that was serving kind of fewer people than we were in the past. So we didn't talk about clinic size much, and we want you all to use your creativity in thinking through that. In the past, our clinics would have been about 25 to 50 people served in one day at a gym or other space like that. Currently, again, in this kind of hybrid remote world, we've served around 20 to 25 people per clinic. And these mini clinics have served around 10 people each. So you can use your discretion as to what type or size of event might work best for the participants you're hoping to serve. But we do hope to have an ongoing cadence. So if it wasn't once a month, we, at the very least, every other month would want a clinic to be run. That's not to say that any one partner would be on the hook for providing a clinic monthly. Typically, many of our partners do about 2 clinics a year, sometimes 3. Again, you can use your creativity and what you would like to provide, but because these are project-based work that often fits outside the realm of our partners' case management models. We just want everyone to kind of be aware of the amount of work that is, and typically 2 to 3 has seemed to be a nice sweet spot for past contracts. In terms of the number of clinics an agency puts on. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah. So with the advent of COVID, I think some groups are still might be doing the kind of clinic where the attorneys are matched up on their own schedule with the client versus a one-shot deal where everybody comes to one site. Are those former types of clinics still okay to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, and it has created a lot of question marks in terms of how we evaluate things and how we plan things. But what I would say is that for the purposes of this LOI, an agency should look at what is the model that best meets the needs of the participants they're hoping to serve and best meets their capacity. And we are still open to remote services. We are still open to rolling services. At the end of the guidelines document, there's kind of a quote unquote menu of options that is not, there are other options out there, but it does kind of paint a picture of the fact that everyone has been trying different things. And I think one of the more recent conversations with NCC partners is surrounded the idea that flexibility is still really important because we encounter community members who need a remote option because they're working full-time and can't make it, or working on weekends and can't make it to an in-person clinic. And there are other people who just really the accessing of Zoom meetings is just very burdensome and not helpful whatsoever. And so I would just offer that your reflection on what types of services might meet the needs of the participants you're hoping to serve would be the types of things that the review panel is looking to in evaluating what types of services are to be offered in this menu of options for clinics. Any other questions? We're a couple minutes over, and I thank you all for kind of sticking with it.
Just very briefly,
Yep.
Just again, thinking about if I receive a request from multiple programs, can I tell them that each single application, regardless of the number of roles we decide to apply for, would be falling within that $15,000 to $20,000 funding range per year? Is that correct?
I think, again, I might need to get back to you. And again, well, so first of all, I'll say that that is not restrictive. So that $15,000 to $20,000 range is to offer applicants the idea that we're not typically in the business of offering $50,000, $100,000 contracts, right? And with the funding amount available, maybe that's obvious, but maybe not so much. So that's what that range is really there for, is to give an idea of what things have been in the past, but it shouldn't generally be a limitation. There are agencies that have really much smaller contracts, and agencies have slightly larger contracts as well. So I'll offer that for now and then get back to you about how one agency that's, for example, applying for 3 different roles might approach the contract amount.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, sorry, we don't have a better answer there. Very good question. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll stay online for a couple minutes more, and things might emerge in the coming days. The open question period is open till next Friday, September 30th. So you do have time to kind of simmer on this and think through what it could be. And then we will be posting any of the questions that do come in outside of this information session. We will be posting the questions and the answers to those also on the webpage. This recording will go up as soon as possible. And we'll try our best to answer the questions that you raised as soon as possible, but the final deadline for posting questions and answers for us will be the following Friday, October 7th. So at the very latest, that will be the timeline for receiving answers to the questions you're raising now and through next Friday. Okay, well, like I said, I'll stay on, but I just want to thank you all for your time and interest in this. I really enjoy the work with all of our partners in NCC and enjoy the opportunity to meet new folks and explore how we can provide new models of services for citizenship. So thank you all for your time. And if anything comes up, just speak up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I think I'm gonna end it.